Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Sarah Ganz Blythe, the Elizabeth and John Moore's Cabinet Director of the Harvard Art Museums. And as we get settled in for the evening, we acknowledge that Harvard University is located on the traditional and ancestral land of the Massachusetts, the original inhabitants of what is now known as Boston and Cambridge. We pay respect to the people of the Massachusetts tribe, past and present, and honor the land itself, which remains sacred to the Massachusetts people. It is my very great pleasure to welcome you to tonight's program and celebration of Edvard Munch, technically speaking. The exhibition offers a rare glimpse of Munch's innovative techniques and recurring themes, featuring 70 works, including key loans from the Munch Museum in Oslo. And we are just thrilled to have with us members of that team, Kuhlemann Falck, Inger Grimstad, Statinas Isle, and they are here with us to enjoy the evening. This exhibition would not have been possible without the vision and generosity of Philip and Lynn Straus. Their transformative gifts have made the Harvard Art Museums home to one of the most significant Munch collections outside of Norway. Their recent bequest included 62 prints and 2 paintings by Munch and reflect the final act of generosity from the couple whose connection to this museum has spanned decades. Over the years, the Strauses have donated works of art. They've supported the museum's expansion and renovation. They have endowed key conservation and curatorial positions. And their journey as collectors began in 1969, when they purchased their first Munch print, Salome, from 1903, a moment that had sparked a lifelong passion. In 1994, their $7.5 million commitment to conservation led to the renaming of our Straus Center for Conservation and Technical Studies, the oldest fine arts conservation facility in the United States. In total, they gifted or enabled the purchase of 128 artworks to the Harvard Art Museums, and not just by Edvard Munch, but also by Jasper Johns, Max Beckmann, George Brock, Alexander Calder, and Emil Nolde. Philip passed away in 2004, and following Lynn's passing in 2023, this bequest stands as a testament to their extraordinary legacy. Their vision and generosity will continue to shape the Harvard Art Museums for generations to come, inspiring scholars, students, and visitors. Their impact on this institution cannot be overstated. And we are especially grateful that their sons, Phil and Donald Straus, who have been invaluable partners in bringing this exhibition to life. Phil and Don, welcome. Your dedication and collaboration have meant so much to us, and we are so thrilled to have you and your family and friends with us to celebrate this evening. On behalf of the Harvard Art Museums, we extend our deepest gratitude to the Straus family. Their belief in the power of art has left an indelible mark on this institution, and we are truly grateful for their generosity. Additionally, this exhibition has also been sponsored by these supporters. And following the presentations this evening, I hope you'll all enjoy a conversation with all of us. Following that, I hope you will join us on the 3rd floor to see the extraordinary exhibition and apply what we have learned this evening. And now I am absolutely thrilled to introduce my wonderful colleague and one of the co-curators of the exhibition, Elizabeth Rudy, the Carl A. Weyerhaeuser Curator Prints. Welcome.
Thank you, Sarah. Edvard Munch, technically speaking, came about through a close collaboration between curators and conservators here at the Harvard Art Museums. It offers rare insights into the Norwegian artist's innovative techniques and some of his recurring themes in painting and printmaking. As we worked together on the museum's extraordinary holdings, and particularly the Philip and Lynn Straus collection, we were able to think deeply about some of the hallmarks of Munch's experimental practice and some of his most important works of art from a career that spanned 6 decades. These include woodcuts printed in different combinations of colors and on different kinds of paper, prints exploring the same motif in different techniques at different scales and over years, several examples of prints with hand coloring where Munch drew and painted over the prints in oil paint, watercolor, even crayon. works that the artist printed himself on one of the presses he had in his studio, and prints that he mounted himself for exhibitions. Major paintings in the collection show how Munch employed different techniques in a single artwork, leaving areas of the canvas bare or allowing diluted paint to drip down the surface. Works like this one exemplify how he made major changes throughout the same canvas over time. The collection also includes fascinating paintings that showcase, in a single work, the artist's use of varied media, from oil paint to oil pastel and watercolor. As we have worked with this wide-ranging collection, we have been inspired and enthralled by the connections between the prints and the paintings, not just in their formal makeup, their compositions and themes, but in the ways that material and technical choices in these distinctive media speak to each other and offer new ways of thinking about Munch's practice as an artist. Our exhibition invites visitors to join our conversations and to uncover with us new avenues for thinking about Munch's fascination with materiality. Our work stands on the shoulders of generations of scholars who have thought critically about these questions. These include the Watershed exhibition at the Busch-Reisinger Museum in 1983, which focused on the Straus collection and had an accompanying groundbreaking catalog. It was written by Elizabeth Prelinger, who was an intern in the Busch-Reisinger Museum and would go on to be one of the leading scholars of Munch's work. Her book examined the prints in the Straus collection closely, explicating their technical aspects and situating them within Munch's broader oeuvre. More recent publications, many of which were authored and researched by our speakers here tonight from the Munch Museum, have informed our work. The generosity and resource sharing of the experts in Oslo was and continues to be indispensable to our work. They have advised us on areas for deeper inquiry, and we are grateful for their support of not just this exhibition, but of our ongoing work with this esteemed collection. One project that recently concluded was the reframing of all the Munch paintings in the Busch-Reisinger Museum. In collaboration with the workshop of Werner Müller in Berlin, which also works closely with the Munch Museum, we designed historic replica frames for each painting, including a few in Munch's signature half-round profile. Conservators in the Straus Center for Conservation and Technical Studies also worked on the surfaces of the paintings themselves, removing varnishes that were applied to Munch's canvases after his lifetime and which had discolored. Their counterparts in the paper lab embarked on exciting investigations into the papers used to make Munch's prints. And in collaboration with conservation scientists in the analytical lab, they are conducting pigment analysis to understand more fully the kinds of materials that Munch used in both his prints and paintings. Thanks to 10 loans from the Munch Museum, 10, our exhibition offers visitors the chance to ask in-depth questions about Munch's playful approaches to technique. 2 different versions of paintings are on view, along with some of the woodblocks, a lithographic stone, and a copper plate that produced his prints. These special loans give visitors the chance to think about Munch's processes in ways our words alone could never do. Our show opens with a case study, the artist's exploration of the motif called Two Human Beings, the Lonely Ones. It began with an oil painting depicting 2 individuals on a shore, the man on the left, the woman on the right. What you see on the left of this slide is an archival photograph of the painting when it was on view in an exhibition. 2 years later, Munch made a portfolio of etchings after his most popular paintings, including this one. Since he inscribed the copper plate with the motif in the same direction as his painting, the scene flipped when it was printed. The man was now on the right, the woman on the left. Just over 5 years later, Munch revisited the motif in a woodcut, and again he followed the orientation of the original painting on the block. And so again, the scene was flipped in the prints. 2 years after that, the original oil painting was destroyed, lost in a shipwreck, and all we have to remember it is that archival photograph that you see. In 1906, Munch made a new painting of the motif. Now, however, he followed the orientation of the print and painted the man on the right and the woman on the left. He continued to print the woodblock and copper plate, making adjustments to both, and for the woodcut, he printed it in all kinds of colors. In the 1930s, he returned to the motif in painting once again. But now, he revisited the initial orientation of the figures, and the influence of the prints can perhaps be seen in different ways. Notice the prominent red forms snaking across the middle ground, for instance. This is the fullness of the story we are able to tell in our exhibition, thanks to the strength of the Straus collection and the loans from the Munch Museum. Visitors can move from the print matrices to the prints themselves, to the prints and back again, to the paintings and back again, much like Munch did himself in his exploration of this motif. Our exhibition is not organized by technique or by chronology, but rather by the most compelling technical narratives. To make them accessible to visitors, we developed a handheld glossary to guide their experience. It defines the main jargon used by conservators and curators, and it contains a beautiful takeaway on the inside, which we hope will make for a wonderful souvenir from the show. Our labels contain the most recent findings we've made about the works on view in our technical examinations, and an interactive case offers visitors the opportunity to think more deeply about how the choice and use of specific materials directly impacts how a work of art looks. Finally, throughout the exhibition, we point visitors to the Bloomberg app. It contains a wide array of additional resources, ranging from videos about printmaking techniques to audio recordings about specific works by students, curators, and conservators, to x-rays of the paintings, and much more. Since our research is ongoing, we hope to add to this app throughout the run of the exhibition, sharing with visitors near and far what we know and still hope to learn about this incredible collection. Our program tonight will feature 2 focused presentations by our colleagues from the Munch Museum. It will be followed by a discussion moderated by one of my co-curators of this exhibition, Lynette Roth, the Daimler curator of the Busch-Reisinger Museum. Tonight wouldn't have been possible without the contributions of many colleagues here at the Harvard Art Museums, and on behalf of everyone, I'd especially like to thank Tiona Fincher, Sarah Hagland, and Megan Grady, and our undergraduate student program assistants, Jade, Fred, Odessa, and Leandra. Thank you. Now I'm delighted to turn things over to our colleagues from Oslo, Ute Falck and Inger Grimstad. Their shared enthusiasm for the Straus collection is infectious, and we're all looking forward to continuing our conversations about Munch this evening. Ute is the senior curator of prints at the Munch Museum. She holds a PhD in art history, and her research interests are focused on the socio-political, cultural, and communicational aspects of printmaking. Her staunch commitment as a curator to making technical processes digestible for public audiences has been a beacon for us on this project. Among Ute's many publications was the book she co-authored titled Munch on Paper from 2014. It has been a particularly invaluable resource for us and a brilliant contribution to print scholarship. Inger is a paintings conservator at the Munch Museum. Over her decades of experience conserving, studying, caring for, seeing hundreds of Munch's paintings, Inger has developed a unique understanding of his materials and techniques. When looking with us, she was immediately able to recognize features and characteristic approaches of Munch's practice in our paintings. Inger and her colleagues generously and graciously shared their deep knowledge so that we could do our best by Munch. We are grateful to you both, Ute and Inger, for your expertise and collegiality. Please join me in welcoming Ute to the podium.
Do we have to... Yes, thank you. So nice being here. Thank you, Elizabeth. So chronologically speaking, Edvard Munch was first a painter and then a printmaker. He was 31 years old and quite an experienced artist when he started to make prints in 1894. And within just 2 years, he mastered the traditional printmaking techniques, etching, lithography, and woodcut. He continued with both painting and printmaking for the rest of his career in parallel. And, as the current exhibition shows here, it is often not possible to separate the one from the other. in fact, recognizing the various cross-fertilizations between media and techniques, we get a better sense of the creative process which lays behind many of Munch's most iconic works. A creative process which often reminds one more of a battle than a smooth journey. In order to illustrate this point, my colleague Inga Grimstad and I shall focus on Edvard Munch's Anxiety. The painting about which Inga will talk was executed in 1894, the very year when Munch started to explore printmaking. Shortly after this painting, Munch reworked it as a lithograph and as a woodcut. Although both prints do record the principal motive, they never risk being confused with a faithful reproduction of the painting. Too much has been changed. On the contrary, both prints are the result of a creative and practical distillation process, guided by the artist as well by the chosen materials and techniques. In fact, looking at these two printed versions of Anxiety closer, I would like to suggest that they mark a critical point in Munch's printmaking career, when he was just about to discover the full potential of the woodcut technique. In contrast to other early paintings, such as The Sick Child, Munch was not tempted to render anxiety in an intaglio technique, like here as a dry point. Etching and dry point are ideal for creating a wide range of tonal effects and are thus appreciated for recording the painterly quality of any atmospheric painting. But this aspect seems not to be Munch's priority in the case of the printed versions of Anxiety. He employs lithography, but again, not in a painterly way as he had done, for example, here in the case of Madonna. Lithography allows the usage of a wide range of oil-based media, from precise crayon to fluid touche, and it would have been ideal for recording the painting Anxiety. However, Munch was not interested in recreating the painterly quality of the painting Anxiety, but rather its linear quality. And here we can see both a black and white as well as a color version of the lithograph. So why did he do that? I would like to argue that Munch consciously chose this linear aesthetic to create associations to historic printmaking, namely to the historic woodcut technique. The Anxiety lithograph is part of a small group of early lithographs which share the same linear aesthetics, amongst others the Scream from 1895. Both images are regularly mistaken as a woodcut, in fact, ever since they were made. The two-color lithograph Anxiety, for example, was published in a portfolio by Auguste Vollard in 1896, where the table of content wrongly declares it as a woodcut. I don't believe this is a coincidence, but result of a conscious decision by Munch, sparked by a general increased fascination in historic woodcuts, which, amongst other things, led to the so-called woodcut revival. The link between early and contemporary woodcuts was never demonstrated more compellingly than in the highly creative French symbolist art periodical L'Imagère, which I had the great pleasure to look at again yesterday at the MFA. Comprising 8 issues only, L'Imagère was rather short-lived, from October 1894 to December 1896, precisely the period when Munch discovered etching lithography and woodcut. L'Imagère was a co-publication by the novelist and poet Rémy de Gourmand and the eccentric avant-garde artist and writer Alfred Jarry. The focus of L'Imagère is the image and its communicative power, in particular popular images and their effect on the viewer's imagination. Consequently, the total run includes more than 300 different images. The archaic title pages are followed, as indicated by this table of content, by a rather eclectic mixture from illustrated essays on specific topics such as monsters to historic woodcuts and large, crudely colored broadsides which needs to be unfolded to be viewed. These again stand in dialogue with contemporary contributions, for example by artists associated with the Nabi group such as Emile Bernard, and the publishers themselves. For example, this full-page lithograph by Kuhlemann. There is no doubt about this image being a lithograph. Besides the fluidity of the black lines and the orthographic lettering, the major giveaway is the intricate net of black lines radiating from the virgin, crossing over large parts of the image. It would have been difficult and time-consuming to cut such lines into wood, and therefore highly unlikely to be done for such a humble image. However, the purpose of the image was not to mimic the woodcut technique faithfully, but to generate associations to historic popular imagery. Kuhlemann achieves this by reducing his palette to solid black set against white paper, employing mainly simple, bold lines and flat areas, and last but not least, framing the whole image with a line that is generally associated with historic woodcut illustrations. L'Imagère contains numerous historic as well as contemporary examples which share these characteristics. With its variety of printed images, L'Imagère demonstrates the utter richness and effectiveness of primitive visual communication, which must have been extremely stimulating for any artist interested in creative printmaking. So we don't know whether Munch ever possessed any copies of L'Imagère, but one can safely assume that he certainly had access to the magazine through his extensive network of artists, writers, and intellectuals in both Paris and Berlin, where he stayed at that time. And it's not surprising that this exposure seems to have had some impact onto Munch's printmaking. So comparing Kuhlemann's lithograph with Munch's anxiety, we can see how well Munch's lithograph fits into the concept of L'Imagère. One is struck by the sheer boldness based on a strong contrast of the solid ink set against the paper, as well as a highly simplified representation. The image is to a great extent built out by broad curvilinear lines, particularly in the middle ground and area of the sky. Although these lines are essentially fluid, thus betraying the real media lithographic touche, they are also of a certain angularity and thickness, which strongly allude to the traditional woodcut technique. The woodcut aesthetic is further enhanced by a general lack of graduation. Even a framing device is present, although only as an imaginary line. As powerful this print may be, for Munch, it was just a starting point for a further exploration within printmaking. Seemingly intrigued by the idea of woodcut printing, Munch started to make real woodcuts. But once he started with the woodcut technique, his aesthetic were to change drastically. While the lithograph on the left is built up from black lines, the corresponding woodcut is lacking these completely. Instead, the image is rather dark, defined only by a few thin white lines and white areas. As Munch certainly had found out quickly, creating black lines in a woodcut is not only very time-consuming, but also rather artificial for any artist printmaker. We have to remember that black lines in woodcut can be achieved only indirectly, by cutting away everything that is on the right and on the left sides of the line. Instead, Munch preferred direct mark making in wood, which consequently resulted in printed white lines and white areas. So, the elementary difference in material and technique helps to explain the different results. While the lithograph focuses on catching the atmospheric sky and landscape in undulated lines, the woodcut brings out the bold contrast between the dead, mask-like faces and the lively sky. It is interesting to note that color, which is such an important element in the painting, played an important role in the prints as well. Both versions were printed in black and white, but also with two colors from one printing block or stone. But Munch experimented with color even further. Besides monochromatic color woodcuts, Munch also employed hand coloring. It seems that Munch's anxiety became somewhat caught between line and color. And I wonder whether it is exactly here, at this point, where we see Munch gravitating towards his masterly fusion of color and line, which marks so many of his slightly later woodcuts. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm honored to be here tonight, and we'll talk about the painting, Anxiety. Anxiety was exhibited 15 times during Munch's lifetime and has been shown 65 times since 1947. And this highlights its importance within Munch's oeuvre, and today it's part of our permanent exhibition in the Munch Museum. Unlike many of Munch's works, Anxiety exists in only one version. This is quite unusual, as he often revisited subjects, themes, and techniques throughout his career, creating multiple versions of many of his paintings. We do, though, encounter a similar group of people he would meet on a Sunday stroll along the main street in Oslo, as seen here in Evening on Karl Johan, from the Kode collections painted 2 years earlier. Furthermore, its background is the same as in both the Scream and Despair, merging sentiments and experiences across these paintings, culminating in a profound emotional expression. The reason I've chosen to discuss this painting with you today is that, technically speaking, it stands out among our collection of 1,128 paintings by Edvard Munch. I will focus on Munch's technique and how he achieved visual effects that are crucial to the sentiment he conveys in this painting. Anxiety was painted 130 years ago, and over time, numerous chemical processes occur within an oil paint film. Consequently, the painting we see today is shaped not only by Munch's technique and materials, but also by degradation phenomena and various conservation treatments. And sometimes distinguishing between these factors can be challenging. In 2018, a decision was made to remove the varnish and clean Anxiety. It was assumed that the surface had a secondary discolored varnish, along with a considerable layer of dirt. This assumption was partly based on an uneven patch in the sky, where an earlier cleaning attempt had revealed a significantly brighter yellow. There is no record of either cleaning of this area or the varnishing in our conservation report starting in 1958. But this intervention predates the use of microscopes in conservation in the Munch Museum. And given that many paintings in the Munch collection have been extremely dirty, and that Anxiety may be the only painting in our collection with such a pigmented film, it was only natural to assume that what we observed was dirt. But upon closer examination, it became evident that Munch had used pigmented glazes, and I will return to that shortly. Examining the background, we see that the surface has a relatively rough buildup, creating a three-dimensional base for the paint layers. This texture protrudes to the surface of the painting. Munch chose to use a raw canvas for this painting and applied the ground by hand. Unlike in Despair, painted the same year, which features a fabric ground and a much smoother surface with a more straightforward painting technique. These differences significantly affect the appearance of the two paintings. And as a side note, I'm not comparing the surface to the screens, as they're all executed on cardboard and with very different techniques. But only 6% of the paintings in our collection have a ground applied by Munch himself. This uneven surface will scatter light in multiple directions, thus creating a softer, more matte appearance and a hazier expression. The unevenness is evenly distributed across the entire surface of Anxiety and does not follow the shapes of the figures or landscape. Additionally, an uneven base interacts differently with paint depending on its viscosity. Thicker paints tend to rest on the raised areas, while more fluid paint settles into the cavities. An oil paint has various properties depending on the pigments and other components used, but the method of application and manipulation significantly influences the final effect. Manipulation can involve adjusting the paint's consistency with different mediums, using various tools, and even varying how a brush is loaded with paint affects the outcome. Unlike in many of Munch's paintings, the entire surface of Anxiety is covered with paint. The paint layers are relatively uniform in thickness, whereas many of his other works feature exposed ground, highly diluted paint, and thick impasto paint coexisting on the same canvas. However, in Anxiety, Munch built up the paint layers in various ways. The first layer must have been quite diluted to evenly cover the rough ground. In these areas, the paint strokes are not visible. He has then added details by applying wet paint over dry, rather than blending the colors on the canvas. This technique, known as scumbling, further enhances the three-dimensional quality of the surface, and traces of brush strokes are visible in these areas. Looking at cleaned and uncleaned areas in the sky under a microscope, the layers initially believed to be dirt and discolored varnish shows pigments and form a film. In the uncleaned area, the film shows signs of shrinkage, forming a pattern of cracks. And a sample of the film revealed green, red, blue, and black pigments, suggesting that it's a transparent layer intentionally applied to dampen the bright colors. There are variations in intensity and possibly multiple layers of differently pigmented films, and this artificial dirt is found predominantly in the sky, but appears also in the lighter details in the figures, though less dense in these areas, as we can see here. There is a small area along the left edge where the ground is exposed. This area contains a sparsely pigmented layer without the dirt colors. But even under a microscope, it has been difficult to clearly distinguish the stratigraphy of these layers. Different areas reveal differently pigmented coatings. But the binder in these films has not yet been identified, and the entire surface of the painting is also covered with an additional layer of varnish and wax from earlier conservation treatments. In the figures' faces, Munch used a lighter, semi-transparent paint as a final layer. This is especially noticeable in the darker areas, such as over the woman's eyes. The paint film has a grayish hue, which appears dark when covering flesh and lighter when layered over the dark areas in the eyes. This film also softens transitions between colors and dampens contrast, making the figures look more ghost-like and blood-drained. The complex buildup of layers contrasts with the simplicity of the figure's features. When viewed up close, the details can be quite ambiguous. For example, this is the man's left eye, and yet he has a most definite gaze. The surface of Anxiety appears matte and shows no clear evidence of varnish when observed under normal conditions. There is no mention of varnish in the conservation reports, yet analysis confirmed the presence of both an acrylic varnish and wax on the surface. These layers are not visually distinguishable from underlying layers, even under high magnification. However, under a microscope, the varnish becomes clearly visible, Some areas exhibit traces of multiple varnish layers, some transparent and others slightly yellowed. The fact that the varnish has penetrated most of the cracks further support these findings. Well, this investigation is still unfolding, and this concludes my findings for you tonight. I just wanted to say that if you see some strange behaving visitors at an exhibition, it's usually conservators, because we need to know what's going on the surface. Thank you.
Thank you all. We're going to transition now to our panel discussion, and we're just going to chat a bit. I want to thank Inger and Ute for so beautifully demonstrating really what this project has been all about, and that is a collaboration between curators and conservators, and I'm happy to be joined as a curator, also by one of our own conservators, Kate Smith, who is the head of our paintings lab here at the Harvard Art Museums. We wanted to make sure we had a good representation of curators and conservators to really dig deep into some of the information that you've presented, and I hope also take the opportunity to ask some questions that your presentations, I think, have really posed for us. So as Elizabeth mentioned, the exhibition is not organized chronologically or even by technique. We really decided to embrace the non-linearity of Munch's own practice, so the question of repetition, return, revisiting motifs, but also, Ute, as you so beautifully called it, sort of cross-fertilization across different techniques. And it really was a treat also this morning to be in the exhibition with Ute and Inger, with the students, and see how actually both of you, who work in different departments at the Munch Museum, were kind of coming into conversation, and also there was moments of sort of mutual discovery and excitement about the works in the collections here at the Harvard Art Museum. So that just as a bit of a preface. I wanted to kick it off because we sort of ended on paintings, Inger, and we have Kate joining us as well to think about the question you really gave us, those incredible microscopic views into the painting anxiety. You also sort of touched on us for something that comes up in the exhibition quite prominently, and that is the question of the support and the choice of the support, the difference between choosing a thicker canvas weave or thinner, or you mentioned also board, the use for the screen. And I was hoping you could sort of talk a little bit about, in your experience with Munch's paintings, why you think he might have made some of these choices, as really thinking through how that medium was going to behave on the support, or was it more just a sort of larger experimental approach to art making generally?
Well, it's something that we haven't really researched, but we see a big variation in supports in our collection. He has also many paintings on wooden boards. And he also varies his canvases and paints on unground canvases as well. So we have quite a few of those. And they all give a very different expression. I don't know if it was noticeable in the photos, but with the anxiety and despair painted the same year, he obviously made two very different choices. It could be laziness, because most of his paintings is on a fabric ground canvas, so that's what he used for the most part. But he would experiment also with ground, because he was very intent on achieving a matte surface on his paintings. And he would try different mediums to achieve that. For once, he would not varnish his paintings. That's very important for Munch. But he would also try, he would experiment with casein ground, for example, because it's very dry and it drives the oil out of the surface of the painting, so it appears matter. But we had big trouble with the casein cracking immediately, so he didn't work extensively with it. But we have quite a few paintings with the casein ground.
I'm just putting up our example here, and although it's this campus, I realized we didn't update our media lines for the presentation. So actually, we did the testing in advance and determined that we believe this also to be casein.
Yeah, it looks like casein.
And you
it does.
that out when you visited us over a year ago now. Because of the crack network in the ground layer, you said that looks like casein. And my colleague Ellen and I were looking with you, and it's not a material I'm as familiar with, and so that's one of the many times that your insights into his practice, or seeing over and over and over again on volume what he did, made such a difference. Because I don't know that we would have necessarily thought to investigate that further, but we did find that it's at least protein-based, and we assume casein.
Yeah,
and then oil paint on top of that. So it's exactly like what you were describing.
Yeah, that's great. You have an example of that.
Yeah.
But when I first saw this painting as a photograph before I came over, I initially thought it was a bare canvas. So I was very surprised because it's very tinted, really, and I don't think. Well, most of our casein paintings are covered with paint, really, so we don't really see the color of it. But that's something I should look at when I get back,
Right. If it's been
to compare it.
colored over time due to exposure, or if he applied it. Yeah, that's something we don't know yet.
Yeah, and you weren't there when we discussed it today, because I was wondering if it's tinted, if you've looked into that.
Not yet.
No.
But we
Maybe you have a glaze.
coming back.
Maybe you have a glaze. A tinted glaze sometime.
Work in progress,
Yes.
obviously. Edvard Munch, especially with the incredible collection in Oslo and now here also at the Harvard Art Museums. We kind of posit in the exhibition, even for work like this, that Munch may have been thinking about printmaking, and you sort of showed, how even within printmaking techniques, he may have also been, thinking across, what can one technique do for me in maybe an easier way, a faster way? Do you see other examples of that kind of mimicry across different media, in print or printmaking and painting? Like imitating one technique in another. So for example, Elizabeth pointed out, and it's too far back in the slide deck to go back, but the later example of Munch's Two Human Beings, the Lonely Ones, that's in the exhibition, feels very, very different from one, 30 years before, which has a much more sort of painterly quality, a kind of sedimented landscape. And by the time we're in the 30s, it feels actually much more inspired by the shapes in the prints.
Yeah, I definitely think so, but what kind of example? Well, there are examples where actually the painting comes afterwards, so the print comes first, and I think that's maybe a surprise as well, that you think it's always the other way around, first comes the painting, but that's really, he's a painter, printmaker. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it starts off as a print and then it ends up as a painting. It's this Two Women at the Shore, which is in your exhibition, I believe, the Woodcut. Yep. Yeah, and so we have that in our exhibition, the painting, the print, and the woodblock, and so that's an example where really the painting originates in the print.
And it's very graphic, the painting.
Yes, yes.
Blocks of colors.
Yeah, and I don't have a slide of that, but we also have sort of three impressions of that in the exhibition of the print, that actually there is no painting. So sometimes it is, it's painting first, print first, and sort of a back and forth throughout.
I've got a question for you, Uta. It's like top of mind, if you don't mind me jumping in, Lynette. I loved how you were talking about Munch's play of with color and line.
and how he was achieving that in different ways in the lithograph and then in the woodcut. And I wonder what you think about, and the part where you were talking, at one point you were talking about the direct line and how he was really favoring the direct line and how that impacted his woodcuts. Would you share some thoughts on his jigsaw woodcuts and the white lines that are created by him actually carving out the wood blocks and then reassembling them?
Yeah, I think really that's what I was also basically ending my talk with, is really, I think that he liked also the jigsaw technique exactly because it's this combination of line and color, that you get a linear shape in a solid color. And that was for him very attractive for whatever reasons. And I believe actually that this magazine, Le Magère, played a role in that as well, because of these historic broadsides, which are colored with stencils very crudely and effectively. And I think that's coming from there as well. So you have line and color there, but also I think what he really becomes more, or appreciates more and more, is this natural line in the grain, in the wood, that he really plays with that or really enhances it or lets it speak. So he knew what he was doing and what kind of material he selected for printing. And so he, that's again where line and color unites and gets an expression on its own. And it's really one of the, I think these are the most beautiful prints, the kiss you have in the exhibitions. I mean, this is really fantastic.
Are you starting to see some other art historical influences on Munch through L'Imagier, aside from the Gaumont?
I think the general concept that it appealed to him, and I don't really want to compare one image with the other. It's more this whole. I really can visualize Munch's experience going through this book or the magazine, and I really can recommend to everybody to do that and make sure you have a paper conservator or somebody alongside, so somebody unfolds those broadsides for you, and then. Munch has also at his time, his prints were often described as being so monumental. And they are, the woodcuts, they are so monumental. I mean, he works in those big formats. Gauguin didn't do that. I mean, nobody did that at his time. He does that. Where does he get that from? I think it's really this broadside. I mean, that's my, I don't have any proof. It's just my sense that he really harks back to a different time, where printmaking was really at the beginning, and in Europe around 1500 or 1400, that was the way of communicating. I mean, what had people otherwise? I mean, and it was cheap. They were around in thousands, and today we have only a few. They are so rare. So this is basic communication he's going back to.
It's fascinating.
That makes me think of something as well, the fact that often now we think about prints and we think about, quantity, democratization, getting it out there. And then we also have the idea of the edition, right? So the limited, the rare. Maybe you could speak for us a little bit about how Munch's actual approach. I mean, we see he's repeating his motifs many times. We know when he sold a painting, he would paint another one. He's very well known for this idea, this kind of kill and cure technique that, well, if it's out in the snow, the painting, and it gets a little ruined, he can paint another one, right? So there's a kind of sort of confidence around, being able to always make more.
Yeah, he was very practical, and he did whatever he wanted to do. He was not restrained by any kind of rules and of conduct, so he didn't bother about that. And the whole concept of the limited edition and he signed his works when he sold it, but otherwise the limited edition, that was around at his time also already, but he didn't work like that. It's very rarely that a print is numbered. And that's usually when he works together with a publisher. So he himself, he refused to limit himself by saying, I promise I print only 40 impressions. So he didn't do that. And he printed, printing is also expensive, so he had a limited amount of money, and then he printed maybe 6 impressions, or had them printed. Once they were sold, or maybe he misplaced them, or whatever, then he had to print new ones, and so he kept on printing over a longer period. So you won't find, hardly find in the catalog, in the print catalog resume, with edition size, it's very rare that we don't have any information. And if we have information, most likely it's not quite true.
Aren't you working on a database now to try and figure it out?
But I mean, it's not that we are lying. It's just, with, for example, Alpha Omega, he says how many were printed and on what kind of paper, but I wouldn't trust those numbers. But they're more or less correct, I'm sure. But
and it's one of the reasons why we have the matrices that still exist, which is really, as Elizabeth mentioned at the outset, one of the real treats of collaborating so closely with the Munch Museum was that we were able to borrow 8 matrices from the museum. Actually, which took one off view in her own museum, so that we could show it here in our exhibition. But it's because he retained them in order to be able to return to those motifs.
It was very important for him, and otherwise he would have had to decide how many prints he would want to print. But keeping his matrices was kind of a security for him, or an option, an open-ended option just to continue. And sometimes I think he regretted. And parts or the strength of our collections also that we have a lot of impressions. Madonna, I'm not quite sure, 140 impressions of Madonna or something like that. So really big numbers.
We have 4?
4 or 5, I guess.
4 or 5.
So, but he's really good, he didn't have to sell them at the end because he was feeling himself that he had printed too many. So, but we as now, because we have his estate, we have so many. But it was never his intention really to sell them all, because he felt also this kind of responsibility towards his collectors.
And he printed so many because it was such a popular.
Yeah. I don't know really. He had some plans with that. Yeah.
Which motif did he do in painting to the largest extent?
Maybe the sick child, 5 versions, I think. But he has, of the vampire, for example, he has many variations.
Yes.
Yes, so it depends how you count, really. But maybe vampire, but he has vampire in the forest, and so they deviate to a larger extent. But the Madonnas, they're very similar. Sick Child's very similar, but they vary a lot in technique though, and color.
So we would press you to hypothesize why the return to the same composition over decades, why then always, slightly differently.
Well, one reason was when he sold paintings, he would keep one for himself. But the technique is very different. So, and these are often motifs that he was occupied with. So he would maybe explore the different expressions, because they do vary a lot. They do. And the later in his career, the colors are much brighter and lighter, and also the paint is more diluted. So they do vary a lot in technique.
That's why it was so wonderful to be able to borrow Two Human Beings, the Lonely Ones from 1934, which you see here in the lower corner that's in the exhibition upstairs, because it's so vastly different than also to Munch that we think we know or might be more familiar with, also in the United States. I was really blown away by that painting.
Yeah, that's a good example of it.
Yeah, but I think also it's just, I mean, that he wasn't finished, really. He wasn't finished with that subject. It's really also subject matter which is important to him, and that he revisits it and just tries it again. And it's maybe like a personal dialogue or like a good friend. I mean, that he has this motive in his mind and lives with it and has to try it again, see what comes out of it.
I was struck by the fact that you referred to it as a battle. A battle with all of it, with the work that he continued to surround himself with the work that he had let go of.
Yeah, with himself. I mean, he made 200 self-portraits. I mean, this is really, I mean, what are you doing with a self-portrait? You're really trying to explore yourself and finding out where are you, where am I going to, and does it make sense? And he is not getting tired of these questions.
We have one self-portrait in the exhibition, so at the very end.
Do you mean 200 self-portraits in print?
No,
No, in general.
Yeah. Different motives. So,
Well, he became 80 years of age.
yeah.
So he changed a lot during that time.
Yeah, I think that's also something too. I think, when we think about Munch, we think about, the sort of symbolist, the symbolist works that, are sort of the most iconic, and that the work continued in Norway, for decades. And I think that's what was also so exciting for us to think outside of the chronology, but also that, if you carve the block, in the 1890s, but you return to it again in the 19-teens. We're talking about a very different moment in the world, and in his own lifetime, his own lifespan. Any other thoughts? Pressing, Kate?
Well, I wonder
Want to
what's
talk
going to
about train smoke?
Well, I have a question about what's going to happen with anxiety.
Well, not much,
Left
really.
us on a cliffhanger. Okay.
And that's partly because it's part of our permanent exhibition. So since we discovered that the layers we thought was dirt and varnish is original, we will of course not remove it. And then we have not discussed removing the additional layers of varnish, because they're not really visible either when you see the painting at exhibition. But it's a matter of time.
Sure.
Yeah. But it's definitely a project that needs to be looked further into.
I'm curious how often you consider or undertake de-varnishing or varnish removals, given that paintings would get varnished, but now that we're perhaps more interested in allowing the paintings to be the way he would have left them. We did some of that work on our collection in preparation for this show, and it's a very delicate thing to do, and being able to leave a surface that remains, has integrity, and so that it's difficult. So I wonder if that's something that you undertake.
Well, we just did. In 23, we removed the varnish from the vampire.
Right.
But the reason we did that was because the varnishing was starting to pull up the paint layer, so the painting was in danger.
Right.
So it was urgent, and we had to do it to save the painting. It was sponsored by Bank of America, the project. So then we were able to do it, set aside resources, and it was a heavily damaged painting. The whole bottom of the canvas had rotted away, and so it was an extensive conservation treatment. But in the latter years, we have removed varnish on some paintings, but before, and that's because we have more resources now, and we work project-based, and so it's been possible for us to do, because we we've looked at the collection, and we have around 190 paintings that are varnished. And we think most of the varnishes are from conservation treatments. But we do believe also that we have some original varnish, and it's a big project looking into all this. But ideally, we wouldn't want varnish where Munch didn't put it, and removing the varnish from the vampire and also from the lonely ones. I mean, I saw it again today, and you brought Munch forward with it. It makes such a difference. And I don't know, I'm a bit damaged from seeing the collection in the Munch Museum, because it's many of the paintings have very extensive damage. So I've sort of grown used to seeing that, and that's what makes me comfortable in a way. So if I see a painting that originally is damaged and it's been overtreated, and when you hide damages, you do change the expression of the paintings, especially with the varnish, and I've seen some dreadful examples of Munch paintings being varnished. So that makes a big difference, I think.
I know that when you visited earlier on, we were just beginning, and you met with Ellen and I, we hadn't begun considering which paintings needed what type of treatment, and it meant a lot to talk to you about the damaged condition of many of his works, and this idea, this killer-cure idea, and when to hold that in the balance and when not to. And I think it meant a lot to Ellen and I to have access to your insights, because it was important to us from the beginning. This group of Munch paintings had come into our care, and you don't have an opportunity to work with a lot of his paintings in a collection like this. So it meant a lot to know that we were doing it respectfully, and that we'd be able to do it well. And it was in large part because of the access we had to you all.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah. But it's because of the size of the collection that it becomes evident.
Yes, right.
So I understand, often when we see a Munch or two Munch paintings in other museums, they don't have that information.
Right, the context.
Yeah, so the paintings would be treated, I don't know, more like other paintings, which makes sense. But it's not Munch anymore then.
Right.
Yeah. So come and see our damaged paintings.
They're amazing.
Yes, amazing. We can highly recommend a visit to Oslo.
Oh, yes.
For certain. So I'd like to open it up to the audience. If anyone has any questions about Munch, technically speaking. Yes, right here. I think we have microphones. They'll come down to you. Thank you.
I'm a school teacher. You can probably hear me.
It's basically wait because we're recording, and then it's also on the recording. Thank you. It's just a sec.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you for this. This is wonderful. I was just wondering if Munch kept any kind of record. It sounds like he didn't, but I'm wondering if he kept any notes on his prints or on the editions, or notes on his paintings. Did he keep a journal? Do you have access to that? And that was the question. Thank you.
Panelists, use a microphone as well. Oh, we are. Could you not?
No, it's really hard to hear you. Like the one in the middle, I can't hear her.
Oh. Was it? I'm sorry. I wish we had known that.
It's on.
Before. We on. Or are you just a quieter, not shouting into it like I am? Oh, is low.
We'll speak up then.
We have a lot of notes and documents, but not precisely about the print runs. This is really something you have to research, and there are maybe some letters that he's writing to his printers, and that, I really need 5 or 10 extra impressions of these, and then sometimes he kept then the plates and printing matrices at the printers, and he is somewhere else, and they correspond then by mail or by mail, or he sends friends to go and check whether his lithographic stones are still in order, and so he's very concerned. And there's lots of information, but it's not, unfortunately, all in one handy notebook, and where it says, "Oh, I did so and so many impressions." He was not so organized. His later printers, but when he really got to a little bit money, and then he bought his estate, and then he had a printing workshop there as well. Then he worked together with a professional printmaker, a printer, who came to his place, and they worked together. And he was very meticulous. I really love him, really, because he made a note on the print, when they printed and how many they pulled. And so this is really, really valuable.
Thank you. Welcome. Back over here.
I noticed in the preview of the exhibition that for the wood blocks that you have, you identify all the different types of wood used. Is that just a descriptive identifier, or does the choice of wood make a difference to the outcome of the print?
It does make a difference, definitely. And those identifications were made a long time ago by a printmaker, and Inge, do you know?
I'm not sure I know.
But long before my time, so we just accept this information as being true. And I have the feeling that Munch was using the materials which were around, and he used also, cutting boards, or from crates, the lock, or all kind of different woods, veneer and solid wood and fruit wood and wood with texture, or you have also for paintings those panels, the wooden panels, which he used also for making wood blocks. So it's a whole variety, and there's no system other than he used whatever was handy.
Yeah,
but he knew. I'm sure he knew. He knew when he handed the wood. I think he had an idea whether it would be a coarse wood or hard to work with, or whether it would introduce some new exciting structures or textures. I'm sure he did that. Yeah.
And the wood identifications we took from the Catalogue Raisonné, authored by Gerd Wold. That's what they use.
Also over here in the center.
Hi, I was just curious, you spoke quite a bit about the grounds and the varnishes and so forth. So what, I'm just trying to get a better understanding of the historic context of what other artists that Munch would have been working with.
Sorry, what other?
With the grounds, what kind of, what were other artists doing at the time that he would have been influenced by, or what his training was? What were artists doing with the grounds at that time? Or was he really just experimenting?
Well, since he used it for very few paintings in the collection, the majority of his paintings are made on the fabric ground canvas, and that was the most common thing to do at the time, but throughout his career, really.
Well, most of them are mediums as well, like the cassine and the other mediums put on top.
Yeah, they are also rare. We see it sparsely in the collection. The majority of the paintings are made with traditional oil paints. But he would also use different materials depending on what he was working on, because he's made some monumental paintings, huge paintings, 4.5 by 11 meters. I don't know what that is in feet, but much more.
Big.
Yeah, it's like a flat, And because of the size of it, he was working outside, and then he would use dry pigments and different binders. So he would experiment with all kinds of materials. He worked in a span of 60 years, so it's only natural to try out different materials. But for the big paintings, I think it was also, like Wootcut is saying, it was also a practical matter. You know, you don't buy a little tube of paint if you're covering large surfaces. So then he would use dry pigments. But he has painted with any kind of medium.
And I would say even within oil, you know, there's so much variation in how he's actually applying it, the scratching into the surface, so it's really been, even just in the paintings that we have here now in the collection, you know, there's just a wide variety of ways to approach, you know, oil on canvas.
Yeah, and I think that may be how you get the most different effects. It's how you apply the paint and where you apply it. So I think he would. That's what he would use for the most part. The manipulation of his medium.
Another question? Maybe here.
Hi. Did woodblock become more popular because of Munch and Munch's popularity?
Was
now today? Or
No, then.
Yeah. Whether they were more popular than the other.
Whether it became more popular because of Munch's use of it. Yes, that's how I understood it.
He was so important for the German expressionists. He was really their hero, and they tried very hard also to introduce him, to exhibit with him. But he was not really interested. He was working on his own. Yes, he really was a pathfinder, or what would you call it?
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely, yeah.
And actually our co-curator, Peter Murphy, will be doing an Art Studies Center seminar in April on Munch and the German expressionists, and also thinking about the important influence that he had in Germany. Germany was very important for his own reception and career, and he lived there on and off for quite a while. Yes, down here. I make you go up and down.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what some of Munch's different intentions were with printmaking. It seems like some of it was a commercial, practical way to bank on like a successful composition, but then when he's making a print before he makes a painting, it seems like he's maybe using the medium of print as a way to work out ideas and figure out a composition. And yeah, I was wondering, like, does printmaking almost become a form of drawing for Munch? Is there, and then I don't know, in the journals or any of his writing, does he talk about what he's going for with printmaking?
Yeah, well, thank you. I wish I knew, or that he had told us. It's a really good question. I think, it's so much of a mystery with Munch and printmaking, and how did he learn that? I mean, we don't know really. It looks like that he was an autodidact, but it's so difficult to believe that. But when you see his early dry points, yes, I can see that. They really become better quickly, but I mean, you have also the early ones are very simple. But with the woodcut, he really plunges into and produces right away really wonderful woodcuts. And maybe he just was very talented. But I think initially that he turned into printmaking was this idea of promoting his art. He had exhibitions, he showed his art, but he sold very poorly. So then somebody told him, why don't you make some prints of your motifs and then try to sell those, and people are more likely to pick those up, and then you can print a lot of them, and then you can earn even more money. And so the first prints he made are more or less versions of his paintings, and like the ones I showed also here on the screen with what did I show? The sick child. So they are really quite close versions of the paintings, and I think that's where it started. But then very quickly he discovered that printmaking was a medium in its own right, and that it gave him something which he didn't get in painting. So that's why he continued. And what exactly that is, I don't know. There are certainly some printmakers here who can tell us, I mean, what it really is, this magic of creating a matrix and then pulling impressions which can be quite the same or can be quite different. So I think this is really a kind of different creativity which appeals to the person who wants to be creative.
It's such a beautiful mystery. It really is. And commercialism can't explain away this range of experimentation and play. No. We have, just the examples in the show. You have works from the jigsaw woodblock where he doesn't print every part of the jigsaw. Then you have examples where another jigsaw where he'll print directly from the block, but then he'll mask out certain parts of the block for other impressions, sort of almost trying to erase, or you're just masking out parts of it. And it's so much more than just the composition. It's playing with print inside out. And he'll carve in one direction, make a hole, so many impressions from that block, and then he'll carve other blocks with the same image but in reverse orientation, so redoing it. I mean, really thinking inside out, up, down, left, and right. It's really fun to think about Munch and print. And especially when you look at the holdings at the Munch, where you just see so much more variety than you can even imagine.
It turns, the principle of printmaking upside down, doesn't it?
Yes.
Because, as we said also this morning, the idea of printmaking is that you produce a matrix and then you just generate X amount of impressions which are more or less the same. Munch doesn't do that. He creates unique prints, and so you wonder why does he do prints in the first place? At the end of the day, they are all unique, more or less. It's interesting.
And just when you think it's all about color, you find impressions that are monochromatic. And just when you think it's about line, he's masking out the composition and denying the line. It's so interesting.
Having said all this, which is true, there's also a certain danger of misrepresenting now. You find also some motives which are quite the same, and then you can look at 30 or 50 images, and you really have to go with a magnifying glass to spot the differences. And some more accidental, maybe. So there, it was just. Then he was really doing prints as one would expect. He was doing prints. Alpha and Omega, for example, that's a series which he made. It was in Denmark, and there's a little variety within the motifs. It's mainly the paper which differs, not the image.
Well, I think we're out of time, so we're going to end on beautiful mystery.